I never imagined that raising my glass at my father's hospital bedside would taste so bitter. As I held a trembling stem of champagne, the scent of antiseptic mingled with the sweetness, reminding me that success can be a hollow word. I had flown in a rush to stand beside him after emergency surgery, sacrificing a new business pitch and countless hours of preparation. My brothers, clad in suits and shoes, offered toasts praising our father's wisdom in raising successful children. Their smiles were bright, their voices steady, but mine faltered. I watched a physician's white coat fade past my vision as doubt crept in. Had I truly earned his pride? Or was I merely the sibling whose bank account paid for his survival? The flicker of light on the forward drip caught my eye, and I realized that beneath our family's fog lay deeper currents of resentment and sacrifice than I had ever admitted. I thought about the long nights I spent crunching numbers to fund my startup and his mounting medical bills. While my siblings enjoyed weekends away, I was glued to invoices and bank statements, transferring funds to the hospital and negotiating with insurance companies. I remembered the evening I skipped a celebratory meal with investors because a call from the oncology unit demanded immediate payment. Their cars felt distant when I discovered my credit limit had been reached. Standing there, clutching a phone that displayed my dwindling account balance, I realized that every cent I earned was tied to my father's heartbeat. The irony was palpable. In our father's eyes, my brothers were the success story, yet I was the one literally keeping him alive. I felt a sting of anger mixed with pride, unsure whether to resent him or to feel contempt for my own generosity. When I met my father in the recovery room, he was sedated, his breath shallow, tubes winding from his arms like vines. Nurses moved around us, their efficiency both reassuring and unsettling. I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and whispered, "I'm here, Dad." I wanted him to know that the financial burden and sleepless nights were nothing compared to seeing his eyes. But I hesitated, recalling how he had barely glanced at my apartment on my last visit, instead asking after my brother's new houses. Their laughter echoed in the hallway as they praised Dad's courage in facing a life-threatening condition. I stood by, wondering if my sacrifices would ever earn a nod of approval. The tension between my heart's relief and my soul's ache made me question everything I thought I knew about love and family. The night before the surgery, I sat in a corner of the hospital cafeteria, nursing a cup of coffee. Lights cast shadows as I reviewed hospital bills stacked like trophies on the table. Each line item represented a gamble, an MRI, scans, pre-surgical tests. I traced the total cost with my finger and felt a surge of dread. Every dollar sign was a countdown to potential disaster. My phone buzzed with messages of encouragement from friends, unaware of the toll this crisis had taken on my savings. I wanted to tell them that I had drained my account, but pride held my tongue. I closed my eyes and envisioned my father's stubborn grin when I surprised him with confirmation of full payment. In that moment, I realized that my devotion to him was as fierce as any vow, yet it came with a price I could not yet measure. Morning arrived with an alarm, and I watched dawn light seep through the blinds. I rubbed my eyes and forced myself to stand, knowing I carried more weight than any fortune. My brothers joined me at pre-op but lingered in the waiting area, avoiding my gaze. A nurse led me to Dad's room and spoke in hushed tones, assuring me the team was ready. I took my father's hand cold and whispered that I loved him more than any business deal or accolade. He blinked twice and squeezed my fingers, a small gesture that crystallized every sacrifice I'd made. As he was wheeled away, I kissed his forehead and made a silent promise. If survival meant paying any price, I would bear it alone. I stood watching the corridor doors, heart hammering as the clatter of nurses' shoes faded behind them. For a moment, the hospital seemed empty, placing every doubt squarely on my shoulders. I paced the corridor, my phone displaying a timer counting down each minute of the operation. Around me, chairs were empty, cups abandoned. As the morning shifted to afternoon, every so often, a doctor emerged, his face inscrutable, and offered a terse update before disappearing again. When hours passed without news, Panic set in. I sank to the floor, shoulders against the wall, and wondered if my sacrifices had been in vain. Had I diverted funds from my company's payroll only to lose him anyway? My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing doubts I could not silence. Then, finally, the surgeon appeared with sweat staining his scrubs. He approached slowly, surgical mask folded beneath his chin, eyes tired but steady. I rose unsteadily, clutching the armrests of a chair for support. He cleared his throat and spoke my name, the single word reverberating like a verdict. It was a moment I would never forget. My legs gave out the moment the surgeon spoke my name out loud. The words felt heavy, like stones falling into my chest. He told me that the surgery had been a success but that my father was not out of danger yet. He explained complications that had arisen during the operation: excessive bleeding, an unexpected blood clot, and the need for a second procedure to stabilize his heart rate. I nodded without hearing the rest, my mind racing back to every payment I had made, every sleepless night I had endured. The cost of his continued care loomed over me like a dark cloud. As I walked back to the waiting area, I felt strangely hollow. The chairs that once seemed torture devices now offered no comfort. I sank into one and buried my face in my hands. Tears streamed freely, not only for fear of losing him but also for exhaustion and resentment I could no longer suppress. I thought of my brothers celebrating in the cafeteria down the hall, enjoying coffee and pastries as if their roles in this ordeal were merely spectators. I remembered the champagne toasts to successful children and realized I had never felt more invisible. An hour later, a nurse led me to an intensive care room bathed in harsh fluorescent light. My father lay on the bed, tubes and wires snaking from every limb, his chest rising and falling with the mechanical rhythm of a ventilator. His skin was pale, almost gray, and I could see the faint pulse beneath his wrist. I sat on a stool beside him, placed my hand over his heart, and whispered every memory I had of us together, teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway of our old house, cheering me on at my college graduation, laughing with me over dinner when I landed my first job. I spoke until my throat burned. A tear fell onto his hospital gown and spattered against the sterile blue fabric. I felt a sudden surge of anger toward him for ever doubting me, for never acknowledging the magnitude of what I had done. I thought of the wire transfers I had initiated without a second thought, the credit line I had tapped with reckless abandon, the personal savings I had emptied. I realized then that I had given not because I sought his approval but because I loved him fiercely. Love, I understood at that moment, was the truest kind of recklessness. I noticed a small photograph taped to his bedside monitor, a younger version of him holding me as a baby, both of us smiling widely. Somewhere in his delirium before surgery, he must have clutched that photo. I reached out, touched the edge of the monitor, and felt a connection to the man I had lost sight of among his own ambitions. He had raised us to be successful, but success had become a burden we carried for him. I squeezed my eyes shut and allowed myself to remember him simply as my father, not a project to finance, not a legacy to uphold. The night stretched on, punctuated by the beeping of machines and the soft footsteps of the nursing staff. I remained by his side, alternating between dozing in the uncomfortable chair and staring at the ceiling. In the quiet hours, I replayed every conversation I had ever had with him about work, accolades, recognition. I realized he had never asked me about my dreams, my fears, or the cost I paid for the life he helped build. Guilt overwhelmed me not because I had spent thousands on his surgery, but because I had allowed his expectations to define my worth. Morning light filtered in and revealed exhaustion etched onto my face. I rubbed my eyes and saw a nurse adjusting his foreline. She gave me a gentle nod and whispered that he had stabilized overnight. My heart swelled with relief so intense that it felt like it would burst. I leaned in close and said, "You made it, Dad. You fought so hard." I heard my own voice crack and realized that in this moment I had given myself permission to feel both triumphant and vulnerable. The duality was strange but exhilarating. Later that day my brothers arrived, faces bright and hopeful. They told me how proud they were that he had pulled through. They asked questions about his condition and chatted about the future, never once mentioning the payments, the transfers, or the financial burden I had shouldered. I watched them, a bittersweet pride warming my chest. I loved them, but I no longer needed their validation. I had stood alone when it mattered most, and that knowledge gave me new strength. I stayed by his side until evening, holding his hand and promising to take him home soon. As I gazed at his sleeping form, I felt a shift inside me. I understood that love could be more powerful than any business deal or toast to success. I understood that being his daughter meant more than paying his bills. It meant bearing witness to his vulnerability and sharing my own. The road ahead would be long, but I was ready to walk it with him. Not as his banker, but as his child. The day they discharged him from the hospital in Chicago felt surreal. I wheeled my father out of the intensive care unit into the blinding sunshine of Lake Shore Drive, the wind-stirring memories of our childhood picnics near the lakefront. He wore a loose blue button-up shirt and khakis that hung off his thin frame. I steadied his elbow as we navigated the curb. My heart pounded partly from relief, partly from fear that any misstep could undo everything. We loaded him into my rented sedan, and I sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. He looked out the window, expression unreadable, as though he were processing survival for the first time. Silence filled the car until he whispered, "Thank you." His voice was weak but genuine, and I realized I didn't need a toast or a suit to feel valued. His gratitude was worth more than any champagne flute raised in a hospital room. Back at my apartment on the north side, I cleared space in the living room for his hospital bed. I unfolded fresh linens and arranged pillows to prop him up comfortably. Every beep from the monitor beside the bed felt like a heartbeat of our new reality. My phone buzzed with messages from my brothers, asking if we needed anything. I replied curtly that we were fine, concealing the exhaustion in my voice. I guided my father through his medications, morning pills, midday injections, evening infusions. His hand trembled as he reached for a glass of water, and I realized how fragile our routines had become. I told him about my upcoming business meeting in Evanston, about reheating takeout dinners at midnight, about the buried dreams I'd postponed to care for him. He listened, eyes heavy with shame and pride, and for the first time I felt our roles shifting. I was no longer the child needing instruction. I was the caretaker, the lifeline. My brothers visited a week later, their tailored jackets hanging on the coat rack as they stepped inside. They greeted me with awkward smiles, their eyes flicking to my father's bed in the corner. They brought him fruit baskets and cards signed with "Love from your proud sons." My father's smile was gentle but distant. I watched as my brothers positioned themselves on the couch, leaning in to ask Dad how he felt and when he'd return to the golf course. I felt anger flare, but I also recognized a flicker of compassion in their voices. After they left, I found Dad staring at the fruit bowl, a single pear rolling across the coffee table. He sighed and said, "They care in their own way." I realized then that family could be flawed and still be family. I knelt beside him and said, "We all love you sometimes differently, but we do." He closed his eyes and nodded, his hand finding mine. In that moment, I forgave both him and my brothers for the roles they had played, knowing we were all learning how to be vulnerable. That night, as I sat beside his bed, my phone lit up with an email from my startup incubator. They had accepted my revised pitch and offered a line of credit to expand my operations in downtown Chicago. My pulse raced not with fear this time, but with possibility. I closed the email and looked at my father. I realized that the sacrifices I'd made had shaped me into someone capable of both fierce compassion and unwavering determination. I reached for a notebook and began sketching ideas for our next phase: home care solutions, fundraising events, community outreach programs for families in crisis. He watched me write, pride flickering in his weary eyes. He whispered, "Your drive has always been your greatest gift." My chest tightened as I understood that true success was not in accolades but in resilience and empathy. A week later, an unexpected complication arose, an infection near his surgical incision. We rushed back to the hospital, and I sat in the same corridor where I had spent hours waiting for the surgeon's verdict. But this time, something was different. As I walked past the empty chairs and the harsh lights, I felt steadier. I dialed my brothers and told them to meet me in the lobby. When they appeared, suits replaced by hospital-issued gowns, they flanked me on either side. We navigated the hospital unit as a team. I handled the paperwork. One brother held Dad's hand, the other fetched water and blankets. When the doctor delivered the good news that the infection was under control, we exhaled together, shoulders relaxing for the first time. In that moment, we were not divided by expectations or finances. We were united by love and by the shared knowledge that our father's life and our own futures were intertwined more deeply than any toast could ever express. On the drive home, my father reached across the console and laid his hand on mine. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror and saw tears in his eyes. He said, "I'm proud of all my children, but today I'm proud of you." I swallowed hard, emotion choking my throat, and told him I was proud to be his daughter. We rode in silence as dusk settled over the skyline, the city lights flickering like distant stars. I realized that success was not a destination marked by applause or financial milestones, but a journey navigated by the willingness to sacrifice, to forgive, and to love without reservation. And in that shared silence between us, I understood that this story was not about who paid for surgery or who raised a glass, but about the extraordinary resilience of a family finding its way back to one another.